Hey, everybody, this is Vicki Davis, and we are on part 2 of our journey exploring how we can improve math classrooms. This is Cool Cat Teacher Talk, where we talk about what matters in education.
Ever wondered how remarkable teaching happens? Find out right now at Cool Cat Teacher Talk with award-winning teacher Vicki Davis. Get insights from top educators, tech tips, and inspiration to elevate your teaching.
If you missed part 1 or want to revisit these conversations about math education, you can find all the episodes in this series at coolcatteacher.com/talk math. So today we're going to talk about 3 powerful aspects of improving math education that can help us have these breakthrough moments. And each of these is going to give you something you can apply in your classroom. Recent neuroscience research published in the Journal of Education Psychology showed that positive emotional states don't just make learning more pleasant, they actually enhance memory formation and mathematical understanding. When our students feel safe, they feel supported, they feel like they can ask a question, their brains are literally more ready to learn. Now, this is not just theory, and it is transformative when we approach math this way. Liesl McConchie is our first interview, and she helps us understand how to get the brain ready to learn math. Today, we're talking with Liesl McConchie. She's an international expert on how the brain learns and co-author of the best-selling book, Brain-Based Learning, with Dr. Eric Jensen, and also has been published in ASCD's Educational Leadership Journal. And Liesl, you've taught a lot of different grade levels as well.
Yes.
When we're talking about math. So what grade levels have you taught?
I've taught everything from kindergarten through college level.
Excellent. So Today we're going to talk about getting the brain ready to learn math. How do we get the brain ready to learn math?
It's a great question. And before we even get into how do we get ready to learn, we first need to acknowledge that the brain doesn't walk into classrooms ready to learn. Most students don't walk into our classrooms ready to learn math. And that's the first step, is just acknowledging that reality. And then from there, it's okay, so what can we do to get the brain ready to learn? And that's where we can dive into the research of how the brain naturally learns and what it likes to learn, and use that to help us in a math classroom. So first of all, it's important to understand that all learning is dependent on the state that a student is in. I'm not talking about the state of California, where I'm from, or the state of Georgia, but I'm talking about the brain state. So if a student is walking into a classroom feeling anxious or nervous or fearful or hungry, all of these things impact their ability to learn math. And so many students walk into a math classroom, not only carrying their present state of whatever they're in that moment, but also carrying with them so much from their past mathematical experience. So I spent most of my career working in middle school, high school, teaching math there. And so many of them come with 5, 10, 15 years of experience, poor experiences of math. And so they bring this identity with them that I'm not a math person. And so working with that is also important.
So when a student comes in and you can tell that they may even say, I'm not a math person, or I'll get sometimes, I'm not a technology person, or technology doesn't like me, or I've heard math doesn't like me. When you realize that there is that state of mind of saying, okay, there's a wall up, I can't, what do you do to help adjust the mindset so that they're ready to learn?
So there's a few things that can be done. One is to build real quick successes. So as we look at the beginning of the school year, give students real quick, easy successes in math to help them understand and believe, hey, wait a minute, I actually might be able to do this. That's one quick strategy. Another strategy is important to understand who is walking into your class with those walls up. It doesn't have to be a guessing game. There are so many ways that we can engage with our students to understand what their past math experience is. So have them do a quick writing assignment at the beginning of the year. What has your experience in math been like so far? Have them do a quick flip grid activity where they communicate with you, a short video. What's your experience been like in math? Have some one-on-one student conferencing where you can learn about their previous math experience so you know what you're working with. And then from there, then we can know what we're working with and we can try to reprogram those neural connections around the topic of math. So it's all about recognizing so many teachers, we try to push. Let's get excited about math. And we forget that sometimes these parking brakes are on. Vicki, have you ever tried to drive your car with the parking brake on?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm glad I'm not the only one here. I have too. And I don't know what your experience has been like, but for me, my first initial reaction is I get really frustrated and I press on the gas pedal really hard. I press harder. I don't know if you do something similar to that. And so many times as teachers, we do the same thing. Hey, the student isn't learning. They're not ready to learn. So we try to push harder on the accelerator. And we go and we spend money on prizes and candy and rewards and pizza parties, trying to get them more excited with some kind of external reward. And we forget to pause and to look to see if there's any parking brake going on. Does this student struggle with any kind of past math trauma? Do they struggle with math anxiety? Is there any dyscalculia possibly going on here? Or have they just been through a system of many years of poor math pedagogy where the idea of being fast has been promoted as equivalent to being good? Or where the idea of if I do it the exact same way my teacher shows me, then I'm good at it. If I get the right answer fast and in the same way my teacher shows me, that is what being good at math means. And so that's what it means to get students to be ready to learn math, is to understand that there's two forces we're working with. One, we got to release the parking brake, understand our students, build those relationships, the trust, so we can learn what their true feelings are about math. And then from there, now we can try to press the accelerator and the student will actually start moving and accelerating in their math progression. We do that by tapping into the brain's natural readiness states. Most students are not naturally curious about math, excited about math. Most of them don't find it incredibly relevant, especially at the secondary level. And so that's where our opportunities are as teachers comes in, as to how can we help our students walk into our classroom in a state of anticipation, in a state of curiosity, or in a state of finding the relevance in the math task that we're working on this day.
So as a teacher listening, and you know that I was talking to a student who didn't go to my school, but did online. And I said to the student, well, where'd you go to school last year? He said, I didn't go to school last year. And his grades pretty much showed it. And there are kids that, they were enrolled, but they didn't. And then that's what we're dealing with. And you have a lot of schools, some schools in our area, no matter what the grade was, they gave the child a 70 and moved them forward. So here you have these kids all coming in with different levels of readiness. But now you've got some kids who basically may have regressed in a year. How do we get the teachers ready to get the students' brains ready when there's such a variety of capabilities and abilities and readiness?
Yeah. So the key is to prioritize things that, it's the end of the summer. So many of us are getting ready to go back to school. And, social media right now is blowing up about how to decorate our classrooms. And I can talk all day about the cognitive load that comes with an over-decorated classroom. But there are other things that are critical for us to be focusing on right now as we are about to welcome in a class of students that we've never experienced before because of what we've all experienced in the last year and a half. So it's about understanding what we prioritize as we're getting ready. So in our planning, it's not about the colors of the bulletin board's border. We're talking about how am I going to foster curiosity, anticipation, or relevance every single day in my math class. When I'm teaching, I taught kindergarten and first grade this last year. And it can be as simple as we just finished a unit on the rainforest. And it could be as simple as asking a question. Hey, have you ever, what would you guess? How much rain does the rainforest get in an average month or on an average day? So I'm just fostering this curiosity. And then I'll follow it up with, hey, when we get to math time, that's what we're going to be exploring today. and to see, do you think that they get more rain in the rainforest or less compared to where we live here in San Diego? So I'm fostering anticipation. When I was in the middle school and high school setting, I had a whole visual wall in my classroom where it was like when you go to the movie theaters, or when you used to go to the movie theaters, I guess we should say, when they have those coming soon boards where the movie posters, and the purpose is to build anticipation. The goal is to put you in a state of anticipation. What's going to happen in the movie? That's what a movie trailer is about. So I built a whole wall that was all about math trailers. And I would draw a quick little picture or a half-completed diagram or a question, something that would build anticipation. So many teachers are doing really wonderful things with anchor charts in their classrooms to help reinforce and to solidify learning. I suggest that teachers put up those anchor charts partially completed a week before the unit begins, because it builds anticipation. And as a high school math teacher, I had students who would yell at their parents for scheduling orthodontist appointments during their math class. They would say, "Mom, no, you can't do that. That's the day we're going to figure out what SOHCAHTOA means." And the parent would say, what's SOHCAHTOA? They're like, "I don't know, but it's been hanging on the wall all week long for the last 2 weeks. And Ms. McConchie said that we're going to find out on Thursday. I have to be in math class on Thursday." And these types of things help our students enter our classrooms in these ready states. Now, how does it actually impact their learning is the next question. It's because when a student is in a state of curiosity or anticipation or seeing the relevance, it releases specific neurotransmitters that activate the learning centers and the motivational centers of the brain. And that's where we could get into a lot of details of dopamine and norepinephrine and low levels of cortisol. But basically, it releases these chemicals that make learning happen better and faster, and for us to remember it. And that's what teachers need right now, is all the tools we can get to accelerate learning.
And so we have to have anticipation. So instead of, looking a day ahead, we're looking a week or two ahead. We're looking ahead and we're saying, hey, this is what we get to do, or let's talk about this. And, my first day, I always try to understand what interests my students so I can weave that into the topic. If they're interested in Minecraft, then I'm going to pull Minecraft in. If they're interested in a particular type of game, then I'm going to pull that in. But I love the idea of building anticipation as well as relevance. Isn't relevance important? I mean, they want to relate to their real life, right?
Exactly. And as someone who spent most of my career in secondary math, it's perhaps one of the most difficult subjects to help students find the relevance of algebra 2, graphing trinomials or whatever it is that we're doing. And so, there's the natural relevance approach of here's when you're going to use this. But the approach that you're talking about that's built on relationships of getting to know our students is the borrowing approach. We borrow relevance from what's called the meaning networks in their brain, the networks of neural connections of what is meaningful to a student, whether it's Minecraft, whether it's football. I taught in Florida for a while, and I had no idea the football culture in the South. And I learned real quick that I needed to learn. I was in Tallahassee. I needed to learn and follow FSU football, Florida State football, so that I could make sure that my lessons next week on Monday used the data from the football game over the weekend. And so, that's borrowing relevance. And that's a beautiful pathway because those are really strong connected networks in a student's brain. And the more we know them, the more we can make connections to our content.
You build on something I say all the time that my listeners will know that I say, which is you have to relate to educate.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely do. So let's ask one more question as we finish up. What is the biggest mistake that math teachers make that make the brain not ready to learn math?
That's a great question. I would say the idea of following your curriculum to the T and putting that learning objective up on the board. So when you think about it from a math perspective, if you walk in as a student and you see, hey, today on the board, today's objective, today we're going to learn 8.1, solving linear equations through graphing. And tomorrow, we're going to learn solving linear equations through substitution. Some people are like, what the heck is this Liesel lady talking about? It's just going over her head with the math stuff. But there's simple ways. I understand that many districts require that. There's simple ways to transfer that to a way that helps ready the brain. Just take your learning objective and turn it into a question.
Yeah.
Because questions prompt curiosity. And that's one of the things, a quick, simple change that teachers can make to help students become more ready to learn math.
You can hear Liesel's full interview at coolcatteacher.com/E750. She reminds us that we have to align our teaching with how the brain naturally learns and create conditions where mathematical understanding can just flourish. So this sets the stage for our next conversation about making math engaging. A groundbreaking study in the Mathematics Education Research Journal demonstrated that when students engage with real-world mathematical problems, both their engagement and achievement levels increase significantly. This is not surprising when we think about it. Math comes alive when students think it applies to their real world and is not just a set of arbitrary procedures that they'll never use. So Dan Meyer is a well-known educator and has spent years helping teachers make these connections. Let's talk to Dan about this. Today, we're with Dan Meyer, PhD. He's a prominent figure in mathematics education, and he currently serves as the VP of User Growth at Amplify. He has a background as a high school math teacher and a doctorate from Stanford University, and he has led the development of new interactions between teachers, students, and computers. And this resulted in the core curriculum and digital authoring platform, Amplify Desmos Math. That's a whopper of an intro, but, Dan, a lot of people still know you from your TED Talk where you talked about how can we engage students in math. Do you still agree with all the things you said in that talk?
That was a solid decade plus ago, and I try not to watch myself speak, period. But I have watched it once or twice since then, and do feel like it holds up okay. Like, I think then and now we have people using computers in math classes in ways that do not promote either engagement or learning. These are very powerful devices that can be used to powerfully dull a student's mind. And so then and now I'm interested in what these devices can do to increase engagement and learning.
So how can we engage students in learning math?
With devices, I think a lot of the focus on devices to date has been on the either the generation of content or with AI now, or the delivery of content back in the 2010s with Coursera and Khan Academy and these video and YouTube for education, right? It was like, what content can we give students? And then and now I find myself so much more intrigued by the generation of connection, the generation of connections between students and each other, students and their math ideas, between students and teachers. So Amplify, the software we create, is designed to put students in environments where their mathematical thoughts create some kind of engaging interaction. Like, I think of a number, I type the number in, and I watch as the world responds to that, and I learn. We also create technology where the students can see other student responses. So you'll type your response over on one side of the classroom, I on my side. With a lot of computers in class, students don't see each other's work or thinking. They don't benefit from each other's way of wording things. And they're on different YouTube videos, And so in our version of it, we will see 3 other student responses. The teacher will see your responses. The teacher can pull out select responses for conversations. It's just a very different paradigm than okay, these kids don't know things. What thing can we give the kid right now? It's more, what do kids know? How can we throw those together to make more than the sum of those smaller parts?
So my math department director at my school, she absolutely loves Desmos because she said it makes it so real world. And that's the big reason I wanted you on the show is just, and Desmos is also integrated into the SAT, which is a whole other probably subject. But just describe, how does this particular tool so unique?
Yeah, well, as an example, like if you want to explore what math does, explore mathematics, and you just have paper and pencil, something is like, what is a linear equation? And what are the numbers you see in that equation? What do they do? How do they control the graph? You got to like use pencil and paper and create a new graph every time, plot one point at a time. It's time consuming. And to ask the question, well, what if that 2 was a 20? Is very hard to answer and error prone. And then along comes these plastic calculators, which do a lot, but there's still a lot of friction where you have to toggle back and forth and change your equation, go to the graph, and so on. With Desmos, what's exciting is that it's built on modern technology in the browser. And what students can do is they can change as fast as just changing a number, can see the effect of their thinking, of their changes on these very essential, kinds of mathematical structures, graphs, equations, tables. They can even create, instead of a number, create a slider where they can slide a little point back and forth that controls a range of numbers and just watch as the line tilts differently, as the line goes up and down, as you're changing that y-intercept. That's just one example of many where the dynamic exploratory nature of technology can create more learning and more engagement for students.
Desmos calculator is part of the SAT now, and we need to prepare our students. So it is this real world awesome tool, but then it's also a tool that's part of a standardized test. What are your thoughts about getting kids ready?
First of all, I'm very proud of that partnership and the folks that put it together. I think it's great that the same technology that students will use on this very, very high stakes exam are available to them on any device they have, their mobile phone, their home computer, whatever, for free. So that's great. That reduces technology as an inhibitor of achievement on those exams. And I think what's also exciting is that when the computational tools are more ubiquitous, like Desmos, and more powerful, it can change the focus on these exams from questions of computation. Can you graph this line point by point? And more to questions of analysis and interpretation, like what does this graph mean? So I hope and anticipate that a lot of these assessments will start to match the tools available and create more interesting, more meaningful questions because the computational part is so much easier now than it was.
It's just important that we're using it in the secondary level at the high school, grades 9, 10, 11, 12. That just needs to be just part of what the students do. So it's not like, oh, I need to use Desmos this week so that I'm ready for the SAT next week. Shouldn't it just be part of what they're doing all along?
Yeah, I think that there is a really great case to make for sometimes we're not going to use powerful tools because we want to dive into the mechanics of what is Desmos doing when it plots that graph automatically is not a great question to ask a kid when they have Desmos there to automatically do the thing. So instead, there are moments where we need to be judicious and careful about what kinds of tools we have available. I'm not going to leave out a handsaw for a 4-year-old, that kind of thing. But it does ideally, again, create the opportunity to ask students more interesting, more meaningful questions because the computational questions are more accessible.
There's just so much awesome about teaching. But right now, with the teacher shortage that's everywhere, and math is one of those areas, what do we do to bring teachers up to speed more quickly and support them? Because, teachers have great hearts. Anybody who's in they have great hearts. And I've known a lot of incredible teachers who weren't certified yet and are going through that process. So we don't want to dismiss their place, but we also want to help teachers. Because I'll tell you, my first job in teaching was actually substituting for the calculus teacher who was out. And I had calculus at Georgia Tech, aced it, made A's in my 3 calc classes, but it had been 4 years before. And I had forgotten more calculus than I remembered. And I needed structure to help me know how to help the kids because I had forgotten so much.
Yep. Yeah, and teaching something is more than just knowing it or having taken it yourself as a student, right? There's all these questions about, how do students come to approach these ideas that aren't taught in, your college calculus class, right? So for me, the question resonates more than ever. We have so many teachers coming in, either alternate certification route or no certification, who are in process of certification. Such a big challenge. And I would just say we're not going to fire our way out of this mess. Like there are just not enough people waiting in line to become teachers where we could say, we'll just fire all of them, and like you said, people want to do well. Like they want to know how to do well and want to do better. And so I would also say we are not going to make this happen based on 6 hours of PD every quarter with teachers. This is not going to happen with in-service workshops. It's just too discrete. It's too momentary. It's too intense to learn from. And so where I place my bet on teacher development is in the products that teachers use every day. That is where they have to learn the craft of teaching. So when we have this curriculum, it's digital. I can see a teacher is approaching this lesson coming up. I can send that teacher an email that says, hey, this question coming up, we know that 15% of kids across the nation get this wrong in one particular way. What do you think that way is? Think about it. Okay, here's what that one way is and what you might do when you see it coming. Embedding these kinds of very important content, pedagogical learning moments into the tools they're using every day versus a college course versus a in-person workshop in the lunchroom kind of thing.
Well, we know the best PD is like stuff you're going to use tomorrow. I mean, that's the stuff that my teachers love. I teach them something today. We create things that they're going to use this week, and then it becomes part of their pedagogical practice. And we have to do that. It seems like it can be a challenge, and improving math is so important. So give a pep talk to math teachers everywhere. Motivational math here.
Yeah. I mean, I would just say this. For so many students, the bar for them on math is set quite low, and you can really clear that bar with just a little bit of effort. Like, it doesn't take much to convince a kid, like, oh, wow, like I actually do have some game. Like I'm actually kind of smart. But it does take not treating math as a binary right or wrong discipline, but one where rightness is shot through everything. Even the wrong answers have some right in them. To look for those moments and to say to the kid, hey, I see how you're seeing this. I do see it as an adult. I got that math knowledge, but I see how you're seeing it, and I value that. That's the sort of thing that will change. Adults come up to me at conferences and their voices are cracking and they're near tears, describing how in fourth grade some teacher said something to them that teacher doesn't even remember, which broke their heart about mathematics. We can rehabilitate those students as well, just as easily.
That's great. If there's one thing you could change about math education today, what would it be?
Purely this, that every teacher would walk into every room, every class, and start by asking themselves, what do these kids know? What's in their brains right now? Before you think about what's in your brain, what's in the book. Those two have to connect. And so often teachers are just starting from what they know, which is valuable knowledge. But that leaves the connections up to the kids to work at and try to figure out what is even going on here. We got to start curiosity about what kids know.
I love that, which, formative assessment, pre-assessment, all of these things are just such an important part. And it's something technology lets us do. I mean, there's so many things technology lets us do we couldn't do before. Exactly. Dan Meyer, thank you for coming on the show. Dan's interview will be aired completely in an upcoming episode of the 10-Minute Teacher Podcast. Authentic problem solving can help our children believe more in their own capabilities and in the importance of math. But we also need to remember that the tool Dan talked about, Desmos, is built into the SAT. So students do need experience with this valuable tool. I do love how Dan said that we're not going to use it all the time, but some of the time, and it is an important tool to check out. One of the other most popular interviews in math that I've ever recorded on the 10-Minute Teacher is Dr. Carol Ann Tomlinson, how to differentiate math instruction in the elementary classroom. Oh, I'm so excited today. We are talking with Dr. Carol Tomlinson, Chair of Education Leadership, Foundation, and Policy at the University of Virginia. And she's also author of Everybody's Classroom, Differentiating for the Shared and Unique Needs of Diverse Students. And Carol, today we are going to talk about differentiating instruction in the math classroom, and we're focusing on elementary, kindergarten. Can you actually differentiate instruction for math for younger students?
I think you have to, and I think that's probably the game plan all the way through school. I think there are things that all of the kids need to do together in math, but I think any teacher who's been in the classroom 15 minutes knows that just because we thought kids could learn something in 2 days doesn't mean they all did, and some of them already knew it, and some of them really are going to need considerably more time than that. So I think part of the plan is to think about shared experiences that kids can have, for example, with learning numbers or learning to count simple things. And make sure that those really cause kids to think and to try to express themselves and to show themselves in different ways. Here's a way I think of it. Here's something I can do. And then to have some time that's set aside consistently so the students in that class can take their own next step.
So you're saying spend time having shared experiences with groups where students are doing things together so they're actually part of that differentiating process.
Yes, I talk about this often in terms of highways and exit ramps. The highway is the time all the kids should be together, thinking about numbers or a little higher up, trying to figure out what multiplication has to do with addition or what that might mean if you're multiplying popcorn or whatever it is you're doing. And all the kids need to be in math conversations with the whole group or turn and talk with two people, but still in the whole group. And they need to be part of seeing themselves being mathematical thinkers. It's really important for kids to see themselves as part of the whole class. We're a team of learners, and I'm part of that team. And all kids need to see interesting demonstrations by the teacher about whatever they're talking about. They need to share their answers and explain how they got there. They need to try out things with a partner. And so the whole class aspect of math instruction and everything else, I think, is critically important. We are an us, and we need to be an us a lot of the time. But then there are times consistently where some kids need to spend a little bit more time on something. Some go back and patch up things or don't have the prerequisite skills they need. And some kids learn in different ways and would do much better if they could use a different mode of learning. And some kids are ready to move ahead. So the highway needs to have periodic exit ramps, and by predictable and frequent, not once every 2 weeks, part of every day, so that kids can work on things they're interested in or things that take them to their next step or try out new ideas with peers. And even in those exit ramps, I think it's important for kids to collaborate so that they feel a part of a group. Important from my perspective to say that those exit ramps groups should not be bluebirds, buzzards, and wombats, so that every time they get together, they sit in the same place, and the kids that are having trouble are always together, and the kids that are flying high are always together. That's not helpful either. They need to have a very flexible grouping as well.
So this is very real to me. My mom was a teacher, and even though I went to Georgia Tech, took a lot of calculus, the hardest thing I ever really learned was actually addition. I remember first grade didn't make sense to me, and Mom sat down at the table and we added apples, and sometimes we added M&Ms, and I just remember how she worked with me one-on-one. Math didn't make sense to me, but then when the light bulb went on, it changed my life. So just because these basic concepts are difficult for students doesn't really say anything about their intelligence level, I would hope.
And that's one reason that we don't want to have bluebirds, buzzards, and wombats, because that does become predictive. Kids with less opportunity often end up in the buzzards, and everybody begins to think of them as buzzards, and they begin to think of themselves that way. And we have every reason to believe that every kid has much more capacity than we can see. And we need to, they're smart, not plug them into a slot that's going to become a stereotype.
So fill in the blank for me, Carol. As teachers differentiate math instruction and the elementary grades, the biggest mistake they could make is blank.
I think teaching it as an algorithm, teaching it as this is what we're doing, this is how you do it, now do it, versus having conversations about how that makes sense to you, why you do something, and what other ways you can do it. And look how cool it is that we can get the same answer 4 or 5 different ways, and everybody can explain it, and we learn more that way. I think part of the reason you discussed your floundering in math, my floundering happened because at a bad juncture for me, I had a teacher who had no patience for anybody that couldn't see her do something on the board and reproduce it. And it made no sense to me, and I was terrified. And so that sense, you can think your way through it, and he can think his way through it a different way than you. One of the big ideas of math that I really love is there's an infinite number of ways to get the same answer. And I think we need to show kids that in the classroom.
Wow. Some teachers feel, obviously, these days, a lot of teachers feel a lot of stress, and they have a lot to quote cover. Oh, I know you probably cringe at that word, like a lot of us teachers do. What's your advice to the teacher who just feels like they have so much to quote cover that they feel like they don't have the time to differentiate?
I certainly understand why teachers feel that. The pressure on them is immense. But not only do we not have any evidence that when the teacher covers something, all the students learn it, or even that most of them learn it, we understand now that really is teaching in a way that's totally unbrain friendly. Howard Gardner long ago said the enemy of understanding is coverage. And David Sousa, who the brain, talks about the fact that coverage races are not brain friendly. And if we're thinking that the most important thing is that we cover something and we have forgotten that the aim is that the students learn, then that's where we need to start rethinking things. Our goal, though, I think is twofold: to help students learn as much as they can, but also to dignify them as thinkers and as human beings and to excite them about the world around them. That's a good reason to teach. Covering stuff for a test is not. And I think anytime we start feeling a huge amount of pressure and we end up hearing ourselves say or think something like, I can't teach kids so they can learn because I have to cover this myself, listen to that and think we regroup. Truth is that teachers are much happier and much more creative when they're teaching kids for meaning and when they can do it in creative ways and help kids be creative. And we also, this is hard for us to trust, but we have good evidence that when teachers teach students for meaning, they do better on the tests than when we teach them the algorithms and cover things. So I think there's powerful evidence for that, but habits are powerful too.
So describe for me, Carol, a classroom or a teacher that you may have met recently. You don't have to share a name, but just describe what you saw happening in that classroom that got you really excited and you felt like that teacher understood the research and the things you espouse that need to happen for differentiated instruction in math.
I can think of two. One is a fourth grade class. I think the other one is young children. So I'll start with the little guys, and then you can decide if we have time for another example. But this was a class in kindergarten where kids were learning numbers. And so they were learning to count from 1 to 3 and 1 to 5 and on up. And the teacher, of course, they were counting everything. They'd count the days in the week that were left, the days in the week that were gone, how many people were wearing red shirts, everything got counted all day. But at a math center, she assigned students to go at various points of the day, and all of them were doing work to determine something about how many students were in their class. And what she did at the center, I think, is probably not terribly remarkable. But what she did was to give them all the task to do that was a little ahead of where they were functioning comfortably. The coolest thing about it was that after the time at the center, she met with the kids, and her conversations with them were really wonderful. So one group had to determine how many students were in their class that day, how many people are here. And those little guys were adorable to watch. They're walking around counting people who are moving at the same time. They're moving, ill-fated, but that was not a surprise. And then you'd see them counting as they knew to count: 1, 2, 3, 7, 9, 11. And so the numbers were just all over the place. The conversation she had with them was wonderful. She went through each of the kids. Tell us how many people you thought were here today. How did you get that number? Do you think more people are here today than Jack does, or does Jack think there are more people than you? Oh, did you all get the same answer? No. Should we all get that same answer? Yeah. But then some kid would say, not if somebody left to go to the office. And then she also ended up by saying, since you didn't get the same answer, do you think it would be worth doing this again tomorrow and trying again and see how we are thinking about it? They thought that was a great idea. And the conversation really positioned them as mathematical thinkers. She did the same thing with the second group, pretty much the same questions. That group was supposed to figure out how many kids were there and how many kids were absent. And of course, it's much harder to count something that's not there. They talked about that. They talked about greater than, less than, how they had gotten there. And she did the same thing again with them. And she also, after the how did you get your answer, I've forgotten what the other question was, but it had to do really with their next step in reasoning. And then a third group had to count how many boys were there, how many boys were absent, how many girls were there, and how many girls were absent. And the one question she asked them that was different than the others was, explain to us how you know you're right. The other kids investigation with numbers, thinking about numbers, finding different ways to do things by listening to each other. But this group, even at that age, was ready to say, I'm right because I know this and explain it. It was a wonderful way to have all the kids together for the lead-in, different tasks for them to do at a center, and then conversations that accepted where they were and pushed them on a little bit further. And of course, that's a cycle that they'll keep going through. But that, I think, is an example of a classroom where all of the kids are sharing good and exciting and interesting beginning instruction and asked to do work that pushes them on a bit, and then are talked with as though they're really mathematical thinkers, because that's what they're trying to do.
I love the part of the conversation because I think that truly great conversations are very much a part of excellent classrooms. And it's something that AI and algorithms and robotics are never going to be able to do, is to have those meaningful conversations that truly push kids. I love that. So let's talk about your second example, because we want to have two.
This is a teacher who, I really can't remember the grade level, 4th grade maybe, but this is a teaching channel video. And this teacher is talking about how interested her students have become in math as a result of the kind of thinking they're doing. And she seems to be reflecting on a time when it was more algorithmic, formula-like. And so she's having a discussion with, I've forgotten exactly what the topic is, but she'll ask the kids, somebody to volunteer to do something, and they come up and do a demonstration. And then before that, she'll always say to the kids, turn to somebody and talk about what you're thinking and challenge each other's thinking. Does your thinking agree? Is your thinking helping each other? And after they've done that, then they finally get to the place where she'll say, okay, let's do a true-false problem. And this is not exactly what they were doing, not the same problem, but the same understandings. And so the kids determine whether they think the answer that she gave to this problem is correct or not, true or false. And she says they love the true false thing because they love to be able to defend stuff. And she's watching the kids, and they keep doing the turn and talk. And then this little gal explains why another student was wrong. And her answer is adorable. She's using the idea of having M&Ms, for example, that the student's going to divide, and she gives this many to this kid and this many to this kid and this many to this kid. And in the end, this other little girl, that can't really be right, because after she's gone to the first two girls, she's already given them away. And so there isn't anything to give to the third one. And the other kids are hearing that kind of reasoning. And she says to one little boy, so what did you think about what she said? How did that make you think? And clearly he wasn't really tuned in and didn't listen. And one thing I love about it is when he pauses and it's obvious that he didn't hear what she said, that doesn't bother the teacher. She says, okay, what she says was this and this. How do you feel about that? And he thinks about it for a minute. He said, she's beginning to make me think I was wrong. So she caused you to rethink and to understand more deeply? Yes, ma'am, I think she did. And so it's this merged conversation. But when that video was posted, and then people who watch it can post a comment, the first one there, not surprisingly, was, well, surely you don't think all the kids understand this after that lesson. And her response back to it was, oh no, this was just the whole class lesson. Meaning again that they're going to be doing things that help them go down that pathway to understanding with what comes after this.
Carol, thank you for coming on the show. You've really helped us understand differentiating instruction with the elementary classroom. This was a fantastic conversation.
So this authentic problem-solving approach goes nicely into our exploration of mastery-based learning. Research published in the Journal of Research in Mathematics Education shows that mastery-based learning leads to significantly deeper understanding and greater student competence in mathematics. When students can progress at their own pace, but you also have a solid foundation, they're more likely to develop competence and competence. Joe Manfre is a teacher, and he shows us how to implement these research-based practices in practical ways. Today, we're talking with Joseph Manfre, who is a mathematics teacher at Punahou Schools in Hawaii. He's Math Manfre on Twitter. Today, we're going to talk about some of the misconceptions, Joe, with what a lot of folks call the modern classroom, where we go self-paced and mastery-based learning. I've seen teachers who go all in, self-paced, mastery-based learning. They're using videos. I know of a classroom right now where the parents are up in arms because they say, this is not working and you're not teaching my child. And the teacher is like, I can't teach you anymore. You have to watch a video and work in groups. Is that what this is talking about? Like your classroom follows this approach, but is that what your classroom looks like?
No, that's not what it looks like. So when we provide these instructional videos for students to get this like baseline of knowledge that you want to share amongst all of your students, that's just the beginning. And now that could be accessed outside of classroom, inside of classroom for students. When you're in the class, when I am in the class as the teacher, I'm providing this formative instructional approach. When kids are working together in groups, I'm listening to how they are communicating with each other and providing feedback on what their conceptions are. What they're sharing, I can then extend. If there's a misconception, I can address it. And that's just formatively assessing and instructing based on their group work. I also have more of that time for those one-to-one conversations. When students are turning in mastery checks, I can sit down, talk with students about their work. I'm not just talking in thin air, hypothetically, about like how they might be doing. We're looking at their work together, and I can provide immediate, direct feedback based on how they're doing. It's just more purposeful instruction than prior to having these self-paced tools.
So Joe, why did you move to this approach, and describe for us, what does learning look like in your math classroom?
So prior to the Modern Classrooms project, I want to say my expertise was in collaborative learning. I create ways for students to be able to learn from and with each other in a class. I like to tell my students, they might not have me next year, but they will have each other. So if I could teach them how to learn from and with each other, those skills will carry from year to year. But what I noticed is if you just rely on these collaborative settings, students also can become dependent on each other. They won't necessarily form their own independent thought. And it's also, it's kind of stifling for the students that want to move ahead a little bit and explore more content. Or if there's students that are really struggling and they need more time, it's hard when you're just working with a group to be able to honor that variability of processing time. And that's where the Modern Classrooms comes in, because it really provides that equitable approach for kids to, when you're working with these self-paced structures, kids can engage in new content, explore new content, or take a little bit more time in processing things, revisit videos, revisit those self-paced resources so they can understand it more for depth, and not worrying that some of their peers are ahead in more content because they're focusing on their own learning. But I talk about balance, right? This idea of balancing between those self-paced structures and collaborative structures. We talked about like the detriments of collaboration, that if you solely rely on collaboration and you don't have self-paced elements, you have kids that become dependent on each other. They're not forming their own independent critical thought. Also on the other side, if you solely rely on these self-paced structures, you can have the negative effect of kids forming these narrow views of content where they're only seeing their own way of solving something. There's this one way, and they're not receptive to alternative processes, which is something we need in today's society. We need students to be able to respect diverse opinions, alternative opinions, and understand that they contribute to a more holistic understanding, which is why I'm so grateful for the Modern Classrooms project, because from the collaborative structures that I previously had to now the self-paced structures, it's a beautiful balance of learning with each other, engaging content at your own pace. It's really wonderful when you optimize it.
Yes, in my classroom, I very often go to a self-paced approach when I'm teaching difficult software, just for many reasons. But having those videos, and to me, standing at the front, I teach technology and doing point and click teaching. There's some kids who just get it right away, and some kids need to replay the video 4 or 5 times and to practice it and to do it. And it just works so much better. But let's address this question, because I've heard some teachers say, well, I'm going to go self-paced, and it kind of put my classroom on autopilot. It sounds like you're interacting with your students like I do. Like, I wouldn't call this autopilot.
No, I would say you're using a more purposeful approach to in-class time. Your time in class is not consistent on class to class, right? Because if you're providing your teaching and feedback in accordance to student thinking, no student is the same. So how you run one class might be drastically different than another one based on what the students are doing. Are enough student conceptions showing that maybe you need to reteach a segment and then you have a small group on the side? Are the kids really working well, and now you want to be able to extend their thinking by putting another challenge in and setting more rigorous goals for certain students that you can see are kind of coasting and have the opportunity to engage maybe a little bit faster in content. And then you're having these one-to-one conversations with students. It's really just honoring the individual learner. You're not treating the entire class as being at the same pace, understanding the exact same amount, because it's not true. Every student has their own unique understanding. And what we want to do is reach it, provide feedback on it, extend it, so that every kid can walk in and out of a class and say, I learned something new. By leaving this class today, I am the smartest, most intelligent version of myself. That's what we want to have happen.
Oh, I love that. So how many years have you been using this self-paced mastery approach?
This is now my third year. Well, I want to say I started 4 years ago, but I didn't make my own instructional videos 4 years ago. I was using other videos that were made. And once I saw that it wasn't nearly as effective as making my own videos when students can hear things based on my perspective, and then I can extend upon that in the class. That was 3 years ago. I made my own videos and I was all in since then. And I'm going to continue doing this for the rest of my teaching life.
Oh, wow. So you're all in then, huh?
I am very much all in. I love how I can support students maybe coming from more dependent learning environments and bridge them towards this independent and understanding how they learn best. Because this is also how we learn as adults, right? Like we access content via the internet, via videos, podcasts, like what we're doing right now. People can learn from this and then maybe have a working group where you can collaborate around, right? Like this is how we learn in life. So why don't we just create these experiences for students while they're in K through 12 or 16.
So what did you sell your administration on moving to this approach?
I don't think I needed to sell my administration. My administration has a lot of trust. They trust the expertise of the teachers to be able to put the best learning experience possible for their students. The important thing was to make sure that it's not like students are learning different content. I'm one of 4 7th grade teachers. So the important thing is to make sure all of the learning outcomes, all what the students are supposed to be learning in 7th grade pre-algebra in all 4 courses needs to be the same amount of mathematical content. How we get there could be different. So with the freedom and the trust that I've had, it wasn't really convincing. One thing I would say though is I let students tell my story, being that if students are the ones that provide the most useful feedback. If they're saying that they're not learning, well, you need to be communicating with them and asking, what do you mean by you're not learning? What are you not learning? And talk about the learning experience. I have some students that when they first start out, they're like, wait, am I learning from the videos? I'm not really learning. I'm like, well, what do you define as learning? Well, you need to be standing at the board and I'm writing down everything that you're writing down. Oh, so you're defining learning as direct instruction where you're just copying the stuff that I'm doing.
And what do you do with those students who really kind of push the backward boundary of okay, we've got to get through this amount and they just hold back and they don't ever want to take that test or that should demonstrate mastery? What do you do? Do you have a lot of one-on-one time with those students or how does that work?
There's 2 pieces to that. I think the first one is what you talked about, one-on-one time. Goal setting is huge. Setting realistic expectations for when they have the opportunity to engage in the content, what they should be doing during the content to get to where they need to be to feel confident. But the other part of that is the collaborative activity. So you can't let collaboration happen accidentally. You have to structure collaboration. So at the beginning of class, I have opportunities for students to learn from each other and then with each other. So even if there's that student that's not confident, maybe they didn't even watch the video yet, but to be able to engage with others and learn from each other, with each other, Then they can go back, engage the video, and they can connect the video to what they did with their group. So that can help them as well build up that confidence towards mastery. So it's two things. It's one, the individual, right? Setting those goals, trying to understand what you're capable of, being able to get to where you need to be. And two, the environment that kind of moves them along as well when you have these structured collaborative activities at the guided pace, at the pace that you expect students to be working at.
I hope that even though we see some of the pedagogical approaches changing for us as teachers, for all of us teachers to know that we are still the orchestrators of a beautiful learning experience. I love how you're now creating videos. I started using other people's videos, but now I always make my own because hearing my style and my voice, it's like I'm cloning myself. Just it adds a different level of interactivity. And now you can record on Google Slides. You can record inside anything, PowerPoint, Google Slides, Canva. All of those tools are available for us to record and easily and add those to our platform. So Joe Manfre, math expert and mastery-based learning, collaborative learning, self-paced learning, these are things that you can do. And it can be a struggle as you get started, but once you start this approach, as I often do in my classroom, depending on the unit, it's just how I teach now. I mean, it just works. It makes sense. If you want to listen to Joe's complete interview, go to coolcatteacher.com/E848. And also, I've already done an extended episode of Cool Cat Teacher Talk about mastery-based learning. And you can hear that at coolcatteacher.com/talkmastery. So as we wrap up, the three things we've talked about today: brain science, authentic engagement with tools that make math real, and implementing mastery-based learning are all things that we can use to create classrooms where every student can succeed in mathematics. So as we look forward to our final episode in this series on improving math education, the research on project-based learning in math is exciting. A comprehensive meta-analysis in the Educational Research Review demonstrates that project-based learning in math combines everything we've discussed today: brain-ready learning environments, authentic engagement, and opportunities for mastery. But the great thing is we don't have to figure this out alone. So many things have changed in math, particularly with tools like PhotoMath that have come out, and we need our students to actually know how to do math. They need to understand it. So join me next time for part 3, and we'll talk about the power of project-based learning in math. But until then, remember that every step we take towards better math instruction is a step towards transforming a student's future.
Stay in the loop. Visit coolcatteacher.com. Visit coolcatteacher.com.
You can find the show notes and bios at coolcatteacher.com/talkmath. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Cool Cat Teacher Talk. I'd also like to mention that Cool Cat Teacher Talk is now a podcast. So subscribe in your favorite podcatcher. See you later, educator.